Hi, my name's Sara Holoubek. I'm the CEO and founder of Luminar Labs. We're a strategy and innovation consultancy based in New York. I like to say that I like big, messy industries. If it's busted and broken, that's great. That's my work. But I also like startups. We tend to work on what we call the thorny problems that matter, where there are multiple stakeholders and the answers are not obvious. And oftentimes, technology presents an opportunity to do something different or solve a problem. And so our job is really to help our clients with the future, and it looks something like this. We're asked to solve problems like thinking about how voice technology can improve the life of somebody diagnosed with diabetes, or making use of simulations to prepare students for the jobs of the future, using AI to detect opioids in the international mail system, using wearable sensors to detect AFib, and it goes on and on. My favorite right now is using CubeSats to understand the Earth's magnetism to inform the world magnetic model, which dictates how we navigate, basically. So as we talk to our clients about these technologies, it occurred to us a few years ago that many of them were getting stuck on the shiny object. And so I started turning it around. And I always start that first meeting, or ask my team to start the first meeting, by asking not how the future of the thing will change humanity, but how the future of humans will change the thing. So we're going to start not by talking about tech, but humans. What's the future of humans? Well, before we discuss that, we need to solve or end a really big debate. I want you to take a look and just figure out where you sit on this map. When were you born? And just kind of like just gauge it. You don't have to raise your hand, that's okay. So apparently Pew decided about 18 months ago that they were going to redefine who was and who was not a millennial. It's very contentious. I'm not a millennial, so I don't really care if you are. We'll talk about that later. So this is the way we kind of look at the world today. Why is this important? Because when we think about the future of humans, we have to think about how old we'll be. So now I've fast forwarded. This is how old you'll be roughly in 2020, and how old you'll be in 2030, and how old you'll be in 2040. And what's really remarkable about this is that if you look at 2030, the youngest millennials will be getting direct marketing from AARP. They'll be 49. It's conceivable that boomers are still in the workforce. This undefined generation, which I've been told is now called Generation Alpha, is going to start to think about internships. And when our clients ask me, what is the one thing that keeps me up at night? It's this. America is changing from a pillar distribution, where we have more young people than old people, to a pillar. We're starting to look more like, say, Japan or Italy. This is the thing that keeps me up at night, because we are absolutely not prepared for this new reality. It is unprecedented. The other thing that keeps me up at night is space weather. And if you want to talk about that in the session, I'll do that too. You can't do a lot about space weather, but we can do something about this. So why is this important again? Well, for the first time in the history of America, we will have more old age dependents than under 18 dependents. Now, why is this happening? Medicine, vaccines, we're living with chronic disease. Cancer is no longer something that is necessarily terminal. We're having less children if we have them at all. End of chapter 1. Okay, why does this matter for business? Well, many organizations like to say that an aging population represents opportunity. We can sell products and services to this ginormous cohort when you think about how big the boomers are, right? I know that many of our healthcare clients get excited to talk about the aging population. But slowing population growth results in slower economic growth. We know this by looking at other countries. And many will say it's actually the primary indicator of everything in our economic future. From who's working, the types of jobs we have, the ethnic makeup of our country, it affects everything. So let's start with jobs. There will be second careers, right? So we always like to say, like, I'm going to be 65, 70, kind of retired, consulting on the side. That's only going to happen if you're healthy. Moreover, many people have to work. When you look at the percent of Americans who neither have retirement savings or a traditional pension plan, they have no choice. So now we start to think about how things like the gig economy come into play. You might not have the skills for the future. You're going to have to pick up an income on the side. So many people are concerned about their jobs being taken over by robots. That was very 2018. little bit of 2019. But what we really need to be worried about is low wages. So if you look at the number of decades it took, I believe it was something like 6 decades for wages to catch up after the Industrial Revolution, and like 4 decades maybe from the Agricultural Revolution. We have no idea how long it's going to take for wages to catch up after this next revolution of automation. This is from a Bain report. It's called Bain Labor 2030. It is one of the best reports if you're working on long-range planning of any kind. So along with this comes boomer spending dipping, which is a really, really big problem, right? So boomers have been holding us up this whole time, and I have a lot of questions about this. Things like, will all of that intergenerational wealth that was supposed to pass millennials just poof, because now we're spending it on living longer, healthcare, maybe taking care of a family member because we're all living together. This is not the future. We now have more multi-generational homes than we have in almost 100 years. And you can buy this book if you're interested, or you can go to Luminar, which has this model home where you can actually have like a new home that feels like you live in different houses, but you're actually living together. So you can imagine lots of different expenses are going to contract. Okay, this is a tech talk, so I promised I'd get to that. So what's the impact on technology? It's not so much about how do we design for old people, because what is an old person? It's how do we design for those who are aging. So what happens when millennials get old? Are we all going to take like wrinkly selfies? I don't know. So we have to actually simultaneously design for this aging population. So whether it's your parent or if you still have grandparents, we know what they look like and whether they have a cell phone and where they live and what they do. But we have an aging digital native population. And I love this point that you made earlier about cell phones, because interface and experience will be absolutely everything. The Wall Street Journal recently, actually about a year ago, had this article that said that the next billion people to come online will never type. They might not ever use email. They'll use mobile devices, inexpensive data, and voice recognition. So the aging of America is coinciding with the rise of the next digital disruption, which is voice technology, right? So what is voice? Many people think of the device itself, this hardware, so whether it's an Echo or a Google Home, what have you. Maybe you call it by its name, like, hey, Alexa. I hope those are all off right now. Sometimes that happens. But what voice really is the three-way intersection of the Internet of Things. So you think of the hardware, whether it's a phone or a smart speaker, or right now I think you can talk to a toilet or a refrigerator. I think that was released at CES. It's the AI, and there's a lot of other technologies. I'm sort of boiling this down, the services, and then UX, the interactions. And so what does this all mean for the future? I always like to go backwards before I go forward. So I started my career in the late 90s after business school, and I jumped into the internet. We had no idea what we were doing, but we just had to make it virtual. Most of our clients were putting brochures online. After that, I joined the search engine marketing industry. All my friends told me it was a fad, and I was throwing away my career. I was right, they were wrong. But we had to make it discoverable. It was no longer sufficient to just put content up online. We now had to be able to query for it, and it had to be using the real words that consumers would use every day, not what you called it. A few years later, with the rise of YouTube, or if you remember MySpace, or now Facebook and Twitter, we had to be comfortable with the idea of content living on sites that didn't belong to us. We had to make it shareable. After that, we had to make it mobilely responsive. And then, most recently now, with voice, we have to make it conversational. We have to absolutely rethink everything, just as we did in the past. So, going back to an aging population, how do we design for the aging digital native? Well, it depends on when they were born. You might remember this article. It was about a baby who was looking at a magazine and trying to click it. Do you remember that, right? It does not work. Why is it not changing? It's a magazine, baby. This might seem really funny and like, whoa, kids today. This was 2011. This kid is in 3rd grade, okay? So in my office, we had an associate when we were working on our first voice project in 2017 who brought up the stat that voice technology was being used in the bathroom, to which I was like, oh, that's so gross. And the associate said, well, Sarah, like, how do you ask about the weather every day? And I'm like, well, I'm Gen X, so like I lug around a laptop, right? So she was like, well, no, I listen to the weather, I listen to the news when I'm putting on my makeup. I was like, oh, that's her first instinct. So, in closing, if you would like to talk about the aging of America, this is a recap. Children are our future, we're all old, so on and so forth. I can talk about any of these things. You guys can take it in another direction, or we can talk about space weather. Thank you.